Well, I'm going to get us started as you guys are checking in there. Just a real quick, thank you guys so much for being a part of this event today. I'm your host. Whoa, I went really fast there. There, you saw me. Now I'm gone. Carl Hooker, I'm your host, joining you from Austin, Texas. I am a former classroom teacher, former administrator here in the Austin area. Do a lot of other things, writing, reading, a little bit of everything. When it comes to education, I'm very passionate about engagement of students and student learning, which is why I think today's topic is so important. I do a lot of work with technology and a lot of work with technology integration, and I think that does have a role to play in what we're about to talk about today. But when we think about this topic, um, especially following the pandemic, there was this kind of upsurge, so to speak, of student disengagement. And a lot of teachers that I spoke with, when I walk around the country and I talk to teachers all over, it's a lot about, COVID was tough, but the years after COVID have actually been tougher because student motivation and engagement has been down. And we see this a lot with absenteeism. And so I'm excited about today's topic. I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be available to view afterwards. As we mentioned, the chat is enabled for hosts and panelists. We'll be replying to everyone as we can, and I'll try to call out questions as they pop up in the chat as well. So we do want to involve you as much as we can. But before we get any further, I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So I'm going to do, and I'll tell you, these are real world practitioners, and we'll know this right away because our first panelist has actually joined us, just had a meeting pop up. Unfortunately, she's having to drive from place to place. So she's not even able to be in her office for this. But again, this is amazing. What's great about education and technology today is that she's able to join us right from her car, hopefully not driving. But Stephanie, come on, mic, camera, tell us hi and tell us who you are.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Sorry, I'm Stephanie Lamline. I'm the superintendent at a STEM school located in Ohio, and I'll be parking shortly and joining in person, hopefully soon.
Okay. Yes, drive safe. So we want to make sure you're parked. As much as we
Yes.
do, as much as we wear a lot of hats in education, we definitely want to make sure that you're parked and safe. But I do appreciate you for joining us. Even with a conflict, Stephanie's still able to jump in and be a part of this conversation, which is great because she brings a great perspective from her school there in Ohio. Chris, come on, camera and mic, say hi, tell us who you are.
Hey, everybody. So my name is Chris Combas. I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning for the Hamilton County School District. We're a small school district located in North Florida. Just to tell you how small we are, we have 2 schools in the entire district with about 1,650 students. So you can imagine if we have a lot of students that are missing school, the percentages get up there. Currently, we have about 30% of our students identified as being chronically absent this year. And looking forward to the conversation today.
All right, thank you, Chris, for being a part of this. And now we have people also joining us not only from regular in-person school, but we also have online school. And Lakithia is joining us from Elevate K-12. Lakithia, come on board. Tell us hi and who you are, what you do for a living there at Elevate.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lakithia Walker, and I am an online teacher for a K-12, Elevate K-12. I was in a brick and mortar classroom for about 15 years, and I have transitioned to virtual learning, and I do see that absences within students among our student population is very prevalent, even virtually. And we are definitely doing our best to address it on all levels.
I love that there's that other perspective too, because I think some people think just absenteeism is restricted to the brick and mortar, but as you say, Lakithia, it's also something we have to think about when we're engaging those students virtually. So thank you for being a part of this. And last but not least, Michael Hale joining us from way up there in Maine. Come on, camera Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, way up here in Maine. I'm sorry I wasn't able to join you via car, but I'm delighted to be here. So Stephanie, I'm really worried about you, so I want to make sure you're okay. But my name is Michael Hale, and I'm the Director of College, Career, and Citizenship, or School Counselor, Director of Guidance at Casco Bay High School in Portland, Maine. You should all join us. Come on up. It's only 35 degrees, but that's okay. And kind of like Chris, we're looking at 30% absenteeism in our district of about 5,000 K through 12. And that's an amazing jump from about 16% only 6 years ago. So that's kind of where I'd like to start. And it's an amazing number when you think about it. But I'm really delighted to be talking about this because it's a crisis. So I really want to make sure we have a robust discussion about not just the numbers, but what we're going to do about it.
Yeah, and I when you hear those kind of numbers, and I'll invite all my panelists to come on camera now. When you hear about those kind of numbers, it's staggering to see that increase, Michael. And I think what we want to get to is our first question here, and we're going to go around the room kind of on this one. And I'll invite again people in the chat. When these questions are posed to our panelists, feel free to go ahead and list in the chat too. Give us some insight into where you're coming from, because I know some of you are coming from large departments of education, some of you are coming from very small districts. I want to see and hear what you guys are also experiencing in your area. So let's start by defining the problem. And I think this is probably where we need to get started on this. Hey, there's Stephanie. You pulled over. Okay, good. What are the most common reasons? And we're gonna go, Lakeithia, we're gonna start with you on this one first. But what are the most common reasons why you see, students being absent at different levels?
I think that one of the most common reasons, like we've already touched bases with, is that the COVID era. And so they have just been compounded and since then. And so one of the most commons is aversion to school. Okay,
Right.
so whether that's academic or behavioral, whether that's social challenges, because right now a lot of our students are socially driven with social media and everything. And so if they're having social challenges, they will not attend school if their favorite friend group is not talking to them anymore, or if they don't feel like they wear the newest clothes or the best clothes. So there are those social challenges to that aversion to school, and then an unwelcoming class climate. And so that is very much so teachers that are burnt out or teachers that are inexperienced, and so that class climate is not welcoming. And then one of the other things is disengagement. Okay, there is no meaningful adult relationships. So that parallels and compounds with that unwelcoming class environment. And then there's not enrichment opportunities or academic and behavioral support. And so when those students are presented, our behavior issue students or our academic students are presented with on-level work, they become very disengaged and they feel defeated. And so then that's when you see that those absences begin to rise.
And it's subtle too. And it's, as you were talking, Lakeithia, I actually got a text message right before this webinar from my own 15-year-old freshman who texted me, and I know it's a B day because usually after lunch she's like, oh, my stomach hurts. It's because she doesn't want to go to her French class for some reason or another. There's, like you're saying, an atmosphere that she doesn't feel accepted in, so she's making up excuses to skip. And so this is like real world in my life today. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. But I think when you're talking, that's kind of what triggered in my mind the idea of that disengagement or that engagement or outreach. Stephanie, what are you seeing there in Ohio? What are the reasons, most common reasons for absenteeism? Some similar, I would imagine, to what Lakeithia mentioned too.
Yes, it's similar. And I was in a meeting today at our Capitol, and we were talking about things, but my principal from my one school that only has 200 students in it had 32 kids out today with the flu. So it's like we're experiencing this I think one of it is it's this fear of, I got a sniffle, I don't know what it is, I should stay home. Some of that is maybe a crutch that we all are kind of using a little bit. And then some of it is, I honestly feel like our immune system suffered in a various variety of ways through this process. And so now it's just taking out people in these large chunks of, and we have to build up our immune systems again. But that connectivity to the school, I think, is huge. And feeling empowered and feeling that they're part of a community. And we work really hard at trying to make that at least strong to help kind of increase that desire to come back to school and trying to work through whatever they're working through, which I do think, it's a different kind of world right now as far as the youth and how they're connecting to each other and to school. And I think that's plays a part in absenteeism as well.
Yeah, that connection, what they learned over that 1 or 2 year window of COVID, depending on how long, like my kids were out for 587 days. So there was a period of time where social interaction, there's a gap in their learning of that part of it too. When their first, third, and fifth grade years were all spent basically online. and what did that do to them? What's the long-term effects of that? Maybe we're starting to see some of that now with the absenteeism too. Chris, in your neck of the woods there in Florida, I know again, small districts, you guys see, a lot of the kids in the community, but you're still seeing some of this. What are some of the main reasons?
Well, again, effects of COVID, I think we're all seeing that. We really believe in rigor, relevance, and relationships, and it kind of goes back to what Lakeithia and Stephanie just talked about. You have to be able to get the students engaged while they're in school, so they want to come back the next day. And the more relationships we can build with those students, the more encouragement we can give those students, the better. We are seeing an increase in social emotional needs of students that we're continuing to address, and I think that's going to continue to grow. But it really goes back to the engagement piece and just trying to encourage student ownership and, you know, really making school a valuable experience for those students.
Yeah, I think one thing, we're starting out obviously with the reasons, and I know there a lot of you in the chat are talking about like there are some reasons. We're going to get to kind of some ideas of how we strategize to get around these reasons, but I think it's important to do this first part, which is really outlaying them. Michael, what about you? The big things, what are your most common reasons you're seeing there in Portland?
Yeah, well, and I kind of to reiterate a little bit, but there are kind of four things, right? It's all the barriers, it's all the things get in the way. So like illness, transportation is a big one for our students, and even just family responsibilities. Students actually having to help. I'm at a high school, but help the family, even take care of siblings, 2 jobs, things like that. And then the school aversion and disengagement that we talked about. But it also has to do with, lack of community. Like they don't feel like they belong anywhere. They don't really have a sense of their posse or their group, their peer group. So that's part of disengagement. But also what I wanted to add is kind of like, hey, the misconceptions of an excused absence doesn't mean there's not a problem. I have students who have 38 excused absences, and it's usually because of one of those first 3 that I mentioned that is actually a big problem at our school and around the district that we've talked a lot about. That excused doesn't mean it's okay. And what is going on there?
Yeah, and I think that brings up kind of this next question, and I want to give a quick shout out to Megan in the chat, and I know Lakeithia responded to you too. She'd mentioned in her district that she's seen significant mental health challenges as well as challenges with substance abuse, which we haven't really talked about, as reasons as to why kids are just like choosing to disengage and going to other paths, skipping, ditching, whatever those reasons are. So we've listed some of the reasons, but let's talk about some of the effects. So this next question is going to go, I'm going to throw this out to everyone. And Stephanie, we're going to go with you first on this one, but let me throw the question out there first. What are those long-term? And originally I'd listed this question as academic, but then I realized as we debriefed prior to this, there's a lot of discussion about what the social impacts are too, as we just talked about with COVID. So what are some of those long-term social and academic effects that you're seeing in your schools when it comes to this chronic absenteeism? I think some of us probably think, yeah, sure, the grades go down, but what else? What else is there, Stephanie?
So when we talked about this in our P meeting, I was thinking of those kids, right? Those kids that we've identified as having a significant issue, and how do we handle that chronic absenteeism, and what the biggest thing is. And with me, it's yes, the academics, that's a given, but then there's this sense of self, this sense of they can't do it, and that just keeps compounding, which then ties into that mental health piece, right? And then they just get up, and then they're just not, they don't feel empowered to drive their own learning journeys because they're so behind. And when teachers are in the classroom, they do a really good job of trying to catch kids up, but when you're out on a chronic basis, that's a very hard challenge for them too. And it's in some ways not, I don't say fair, but not it to have them catch this kid up, for a month's work of work when they're already here, and trying to find bridging those gaps between how to support a student, but then also how to support your staff through this process, because it can also be very draining on them. So we try to work on that relationship building, like I mentioned, to hopefully help empower those students to have the grit to go through it. And so our biggest concern is that support piece, because the students that are typically chronic, there's a lot of things going on at home. It's not just, I don't want to go to school. There's more to that, and trying to unpack those layers. And a lot of times the academics is actually the last thing we handle. It's just trying to get them in the school.
Get them there first, right?
Yeah, and talk to them and try to dig at that and then support them. And then the academics will fall into place, even though they're lagging behind a little bit. But sometimes we address that last.
That's actually refreshing to hear, because I do think a lot of times we put so much pressure on academic acceleration, and just and that's overbearing almost on kids and pressure on the teachers too. So to hear them say like, yeah, let's first work on relationships and building them into a place of comfort of coming back into our schools. And the academics, yes, they'll be behind, but we'll catch them up on that. Michael, what about you on this question? What do you see are some of the long-term social and academic effects?
Yeah, a couple things, and Stephanie, that's awesome, because what I would piggyback on that one is that fifth year seniors, nothing feels worse than being a fifth year senior and having to add to that, having to have done summer school and things like that. So that's kind of the academic side of it. But feeling, being bummed. I had a student a couple of weeks ago that talked about how they're so behind. They never got a chance to do that CTE program because they were gone so much. And then they had to do this remedial thing and they couldn't do the welding class. And I tried, but it didn't work. And I felt kind of bad about it, but it's even just that pride that you were talking about, Stephanie, but also they're missing out on certain experiences or actually education that then also makes incredible impact on them emotionally. And then that mental health piece is only exacerbated. But the other thing I would say is that it affects the families, and especially if they have siblings, and just that hiccup of everything from transportation, but how it affects families is a long story, I think, but I could tell many, but even just how siblings affect each other's trajectory is another kind of case study in this as well. So it does affect the family. It affects the parents in how they're able to juggle all the different things that they already are. They're getting bummed out. They're needing extra support from counselors. And so that family piece is such a dynamic, many-pronged, issue that I want to talk some more about eventually, but that's my little take on that one.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely hit that, Michael, in a upcoming question. I want to ask about what's the family's role in this? I think that is important. Chris, again, in Florida, what are you seeing with the long-term impact of this with those students that you see just aren't coming in very regularly?
Well, I think students need that structure and stability. They need routines. And, we try to focus on the 3 E's, education, employability, enlistment. So we really, if students are not coming to school on a regular basis, how employable are they going to be when they do finally get out of school? And then 2, when we talk about the structure and routines, they need to be able to learn how to get to class on time, just as they would need to learn how to get to a job on time. So another thing I'd like to point out too, we talk about the social and emotional needs of students, but we should also talk about the nutritional needs of students as well, because in our county, that does play a pivotal part in those students. So if they're not coming to school, then maybe they're not getting that.
Yeah, that's a layer that we don't always think about, and it depends on where your school is in terms of that. But I know in certain parts of here in Austin, free and reduced lunch, I had students when I taught in East Austin that they would stay all the way till 6 o'clock just because they knew that there's going to be some snacks, and that may be the only meal they eat. So it was a way to at least get them in the building. But again, that's a layer of it that it's hard to learn when you're hungry too. So getting them engaged, making sure they feel safe. Lakeithia, the answer isn't always technology, and I know and these folks all come from brick and mortar and used to be in one. But we know that just like saying, well, they're not here in person, so we'll just throw them online and have them catch up. But that's not always the case either, right? So what are you seeing are those long-term effects of those students that maybe miss out on the online work?
So really the results and the effects are really the same online as they are in brick and mortar, because we have to understand and acknowledge that the social and the academic are not independent of one another. Okay, so holistically, the student is social and academic. And so if they are having social issues, it will affect their academic. If they're having academic issues, it will affect their social. And so the long-term effects of those, just from from COVID and the remnants and the residue of COVID and all of that time, we see that students are not able to socially interact with one another. They don't know how to socially interact. Well, what happens then? You start forming cliques. Once those cliques are formed, then that student begins, just like Stephanie said, feeling like an outsider, not feeling accepted, not feeling wanted. And so if they're facing the social, and then there is no positive adult relationships they have on campus, now that student feels isolated completely, as though they don't belong. So those long-term effects not only affect them academically, but they affect them socially. And that kind of bleeds over into their home life. And so we see that a lot of our students that are absent quite often are also struggling at home with structure and authority. They're kind of resisting those authoritative figures. So it actually affects them in their entire compass of their life, because it then bleeds over the same way that we as teachers see what happens at home bleeds over into the school. The behaviors that are at home that go unredirected, okay, they bleed over into school. That same thing occurs. And so then you start seeing children and students become withdrawn and sullen and quiet. And then that is where that mental health piece comes into place. And so the constant absences really affects them kind of globally in their life.
That structure is such a key point that you and Chris both brought up. And I think, when I used to teach, I'd have parents that would come in and say, my kid just runs wild at home. I don't know how you've got them in any, and it's because I had a routine, a structure that they had, and they almost craved that structure and routine. And when they went home, there was none of that. And so that kind of balance of, you're right. It kind of, again, we're going to get into the family part of this in a minute, but I think that's important to kind of call out too. So we've talked about a little bit of the reasons and kind of the effects, but let's talk about how do we identify and what do we do when we identify. So this next question, I'm going to start with you, Chris, on this one, but what kind of programs or systems do you have in place right now in your district or school to kind of help identify this? Because it's one thing to identify, but then kind of like, then what's the next step, right? And I think a lot of people on the call are looking at that too, like, well, how do we identify, and then how do we make that next step after we've identified those chronic absenteeisms?
So we use a student information system to run a weekly chronic absenteeism report, just to kind of do a breakdown by student and grade level. Luckily, with some of the ESSER funds that we've received, we were able to hire a truancy officer to manage that. But we've also started using the Otus platform to be able to treat it kind of as an early warning system, and kind of be able to see a correlation between lack of attendance and lower performing students. So I think especially for the teachers, and then when you're having parent meetings, to be able to sit down with those families and show them what kind of negative impact this absenteeism can have on students is powerful. So those are a couple of things that we're using to track absenteeism. I'd be curious to hear what the other panel suggests, and maybe those in the chat.
Yeah, and also in the chat, I was going to say, please, what systems are you using in your schools? I know a lot of you are coming from large districts or large areas. I'd be curious to hear, especially those of you at the state level that have joined us, talk about what systems you have in place so we can share those as well. Lakeithia, is it as simple as you're just seeing the person not online, or is there something else when you're doing online learning? It's going to be a little different because they could be there, but maybe it's just an icon and they're not really present. So what systems do you have in place there at Elevate to kind of identify those students?
So what we have right now set in place is every day as I take attendance, as I log into class and I take attendance, once I see that a student has missed 2 or more days, then I'm reaching out to my CC, which is my classroom coach, to then reach out. And once that student comes back, it's all about the classroom climate. It's all about making them feel as though they were missed and accepted and wanted. And, oh, good, I'm glad to see that you're back. We definitely missed you, if you need any help. And then throughout the class, I'll say, Sarah, do you need any help? I know that you weren't in these last couple of days. Let me know. So just constantly engaging with them and letting them know. And then really for us, once we see that that student has been out for 2 or more days, then it goes to campus level. At that point, it's at the campus level. And so as an Elevate teacher, I don't reach out to the parents, but I definitely give, hey, we've had this student missing for a couple of days, absent for a couple of days. What's going on? Because at the end of the day, the academic gaps that were presented during COVID are now becoming academic deficits. And so that is a huge issue especially starting at the elementary level. You know, we were seeing those gaps and those deficits from COVID at the higher levels in secondary schools, junior high, high school. Well, I'm at the elementary level, and I can definitely see that the students that spent their first and second grade at home, they're now in the fifth grade and they have academic deficits. So that also poses a problem, because now this student is sitting in class and we're teaching fifth grade content and they're on a second grade level. And there's just not enough time to differentiate that lesson that deep. And so that's where the small group comes in. But the students become disheartened and start feeling defeated.
Yeah, battling that is such a big part of it. I think when you said kind of my aha moment when you talked about this, the idea of that, you know, if a kid comes back, how subtle it is to say, oh, you missed these 3 things, hurry up and turn this in, I know you've been gone to last week, versus the how are you, let me check in on you first. What a difference that makes for a teacher, just to say to a student, I'm not gonna, I know you're missing some work, but I'm not going to focus on that first with you. I want to focus on you as a person first. And I think that's a huge great bit of advice there. Let me go to Michael on this too. What do you have there in Portland, Mike? How are you identifying? I know you work with counseling. You wear, like, you have 17 titles on your name, so you do a little bit of everything. How does that work in Portland?
Yeah, so in Portland, I'll stick with our school in Portland. We have a district plan as well and kind of procedure, but we use something called Infinite Campus, which 1 million people use, right? That's our SIS. And so we have an absentee report that's run every couple of weeks, and then we take it to our student support team, and then we decide what to do with that data. And it usually includes this triumvirate of 3 different people. So school counselors, social workers, or our crew advisors. Crew is what we call our advisory program, because we're in expedition learning at Outward Bound High School. And so we get everyone involved, and it usually starts with the advisor who knows the student well, meets with them every day in their advisory, knows the parents well because they've had conferences, blah, 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 right? But then we go beyond that. But the idea is that we're taking that information and going right to the people that can connect with the families and students right away. And then we track that, go back to SST, and then again, 2 weeks later. And so we're looking at that, and that's we'll talk more about this later, but we do work on different agreements that are kind of like contracts that we put together and then go back to. But we're trying to track the data, not just from the SIS, but also what we're doing with the students, how the parents are reacting and responding and helping, and then the student helping. They're kind of like becoming more self-aware of what their attendance issues are, and that agreement helps them kind of collect some data on, okay, this is how it's affecting me, this is how many days I actually was absent, and this is the class I always miss. It's always English first block, that kind of thing. It's actually really helpful to dig really deep into the data with the student directly.
I like that. Yeah, I don't hear that a lot, but I think especially when you're working with high school kids, I mean, even at the younger grades, I think having that ability to give them ownership in their learning, and that part of that process of ownership is saying, here's where I identify my gaps, why are they happening, and reflecting on that, because then they'll actually be a little more motivated in theory to actually be there and be a part of it. Yeah, great idea. Stephanie, what about you? What do you guys have there at your STEM school in terms of those systems or programs to help you identify?
So for identification purposes, we just use our SIS, which is Dazzle, and it's pretty, there's nothing exciting about it.
I think you just described every SIS on the
input
planet. There's nothing
and,
great.
export.
Yeah.
It's not the pretty side of our school and how we do things, but our state, and so in Ohio, we have some very specific laws that we have to follow when it comes to absenteeism, as far as notifications and referrals and team meetings. There's a lot of steps, and it's pretty detailed. So the SIS we use to help just identify when a kid triggers one of those categories, but then we take the work outside of the SIS, and actually we're starting to utilize our LMS, which we use Otus, much more to put the plans into place, and also to help visualize the academic gaps, growths, what's happening there. And then all parties can see that. So it's a great platform that helps us make it more visual, charts and graphs. And, those are a lot easier to see those trends. And we utilize those features with that.
I would so appreciate some charts and graphs. I get emails from our from our SIS all the time about here's where your student has dropped a grade below a 90 or something. I have all these triggers, and it's a long chain, usually about once a week on a particular one of my kids that I won't call out on a webinar. But it's to have a graph that shows like, here are some trends that we saw where maybe she was struggling, or where her maybe some absenteeism of work that she's done where she's not turned things in. Having that visually is, I think, important too for the parent. We've talked a lot about students at this point. I want to do a quick pivot to teachers and just think about that effect too. So this next question, and then we'll talk a little bit about family, because I think that we've kind of touching on it. And we're going to talk about some specific ideas and strategies around that. But just kind of quickly around the group, and Stephanie, we'll go with you on this one to start. What about teacher absenteeism? Because I think that does have effect on student absenteeism. I mean, the two are kind of tied, and we see some trends, post-COVID as well on this. So what are some of the reasons? What are some of the things that teachers are struggling with, those that seem to be absent quite a bit? And then is there anything we can do about that too? Because we are kind of facing somewhat of a national teacher shortage, maybe not in your area, but that does also raise a problem, especially when we talk about a sub shortage and the effect on kids. So Stephanie, what are you seeing around teacher absenteeism?
So before the pandemic, we didn't have, I mean, there was occasional ups and downs, just like with everything. If you track schools, like as the seasons change, or, highs and lows, February is always the grind month where everyone's just like tired and they might just need a day, which I understand. So those patterns, we're starting to get back to that normal. Fortunately, we don't have huge issues with that. But what I have seen is sometimes staff don't know if they should stay home or not. I remember when I grew up, if I didn't have a fever, my mama kicked me out the door and said, "You're going to school." I didn't have a choice on the matter. It didn't matter how else I was feeling anywhere else. I wasn't contagious, therefore I should go. So there's a little bit, and that change, that dynamic of how we treat health changed, and what we push ourselves to do and what we shouldn't push ourselves to do. And so trying to find that balance with our staff, just to know, when should you maybe grind it out? You're okay, it's the seasons, or maybe, you need to take the day so that you don't get worse. And so just trying to understand that. And I also, the biologist in me really thinks there's something going on with our immune systems and how our bodies have to build that all back up. I think it's like first year, everyone's a first year teacher again. That first 2 years of teaching, you are sicker than ever, because you're getting all the things. And then eventually you're like, why are you sick? And I'm fine. It's because your body can fight everything. And I think we all went back to ground zero. And we have to build up our systems again and remind them how to work. Because for a while we were so clean and so protective, they probably got a little bored and a little lazy, the system itself. So
Right.
That's the science side of me, just saying, and we're getting there, which is a positive thing. And I think really it is just about, it's more about, should I or shouldn't I? I don't know my health, and should I push or not? And that's where the teachers are a little, but we don't have a huge problem.
Yeah, and it's a danger balance, right? What you're saying, Stephanie.
Mhm.
I mean, I think about the flu has basically run roughshod through this household, and we were 2 years nothing, right? We had 2 years of no illness, and now all of a sudden, like what you're saying, yeah, it's picking back up again. It's like they're all in preschool again, even though they're not anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. I was in the same camp. I'm just gonna, blow my nose and go in. But you're right. There's times where you have to say, okay, now you're contagious. Let's hold back, as much as we can. Lakeithia, I know you do online work, but you also work in brick and mortar before that. I mean, what were some of the things you saw with teacher absenteeism, and also the effects of that?
So I didn't see a lot of teacher absences. What I saw more was teacher vacancies.
Hmm.
And that is definitely an issue within brick and mortar and virtual. The teacher vacancies. And so what that does is that definitely takes away the trifecta of the school climate, the trifecta of consistency in your academics, and then the other factor of students owning their academics. Because what happens is when a teacher is when there's no teacher for that class, those classes get split. And
Right.
so now, not only do you have the 30 kids in that class being affected, you have the 30 kids in 2 other classes that are being affected, because now 2 teachers have, and I'm just using these numbers, we know that classes never um, never happened,
Right.
but these large classes. But now you have a teacher with two teachers with 45 kids. And so what effectively is being, what content and what instructional delivery is effectively happening with 45 students? I don't care what kind of teacher you are and what kind of classroom manager you have and how long you've been teaching in education. 45 sixth graders or 45 10th graders is still an issue. It doesn't matter what level you're getting at. And so what I've noticed is in that way, what that happens is you have a teacher vacancy that goes on for the first semester. And so I'm seeing in chat where teacher burnout happens from those vacancies, and teachers don't get their conference period because they're covering other classes. So the burnout begins to happen very quickly. And so those vacancies I saw were more prevalent in the brick and mortar. And I was in Texas, and then also in virtual, because there's still not classes being filled. So I may sub for a class 4 days a week, and then next week they have a new sub. And then the following week, I sub for them for 2 days. So there's no consistency in learning. There's no structure. There's no routine. And that definitely plays into their academics, which then plays into their social. And so it is kind of like it comes cascading down with the teacher vacancies. And then you have the burnout. So then the teacher absences increase. And so it's just kind of like this cycle that we are trying to break within education. And so there's so many layers and factors to take in consideration and unpack that at this point, teachers are leaving the profession.
Right.
Because of burnout, because of that, teachers are leaving the profession. And so the ones that are suffering, yes, teachers are suffering, but our future, the students, are the ones that are suffering. They're suffering from this. And then you get a student who's already on the brink of feeling defeated that comes into a class that gets bounced around for 7 weeks. Where does that leave that student? There was nothing for that student to hold on to and grow from, because everybody, including the sub or the interim teacher, is kind of flapping in the wind.
Yeah. And I think when you think about the people that are left behind in that case, there's such a house of cards we're dealing with here. The teacher that is sticking it out and trying to get through it is going through the burnout phase. What are they offering now to the little bodies in their classroom? Because, and I shared this with you guys on our pre-calls, one of the principals at my daughter's middle school, he would tell them, hey, if you're 80% of yourself today and you're just having one of those bad days, I would rather come in and sub for you, because one of the worst things you can do is go up to a kid and say something that they're going to regret. They're going to say the rest of their life, they're going to hold this into their head. That's going to affect their learning and their view of education because you had a bad day. And I mean, that's a luxury in some ways. If a principal or a leader can do that, I think it's a great way to do it. Unfortunately, not all of us have that luxury. And a lot of times, like, you got to gut it out, even if you're not at 100%. We're not always at 100% every day. We're humans. And we're teaching humans that aren't 100% every day too. Well,
And
Keely,
that's another thing.
yeah,
Oh,
go ahead.
that's another thing I wanted to bring in is the whole thing. I start every class, whether I have littles, which I call elementary, or middle school, and I call my high school students my biggins. So no matter what level I have, I start off our classroom vibe, our classroom climate when I start class. Hey, you are human. If you are not having a good day because mom upset you before you got on the bus, your best friend told you at lunch that she doesn't like you. This is definitely with my middle schoolers.
Yeah.
My boyfriend broke up with me during second period via text. I get all of those. I get all of that information, even being virtual, that I let them know. If you are having a bad day, private chat me, let me know. And that means that you may need to sit today out. Put your head down. I'll catch you up tomorrow. Because how effective are they really learning?
Right.
And then if they're talking or they have their head down and they're already in a bad mood, I will shut them down for the rest of the week. Because we know children, if you piss them off on Tuesday,
they ain't going to come in by Friday. Yeah.
Yeah, they're still upset by Friday. And so
Right.
I would rather have my student know that this is a safe space. Come and put your head down for a little bit, because we do it. I don't feel like, as adults, I don't feel like talking today. I'm going to turn my phone off. I'm going to go in my room and close my door. I'm not going to go anywhere this weekend. We have that luxury. And so students need to know that they have the right to their feelings and their emotions. Miss Walker, my mom upset me this morning. She wouldn't let me bring my phone to school, and that messes up their whole day. And so if I let them put their head down during this one class, so what if they miss main idea? Well, I'll catch them in small group tomorrow, but now I have their heart, and now I can get to their mind.
I love that. Yeah. And Chris, you're talking about getting them prepared for the next, what she's talking about, the next level, the workforce, right? And when we get there, like sometimes you have to go do things you don't want to do when you're in a job, but there's also, like she was saying, you have some of the freedom of saying, okay, I'm going to balance myself. I know that I'm going to try to do as much as I can today on this one project, but maybe I'm going to take gaps or breaks. But in school, since we're so structured, there really isn't an opportunity. It's like you're here when you're here, and if you're not here, then you're not here. So what are you seeing with teacher absenteeism, or do you see it, again, smaller districts? So you probably know most of the teachers, but what does that look like in your area? Because you have less to pull from too, as a pool of subs, I would think.
Yeah, we've seen a spike in the number of teacher absences since COVID, and we have a serious substitute problem. We can't find many subs. So when we have a teacher out, we're going to have to pull a paraprofessional to cover a teacher's class. So that's going to impact other classes that paraprofessional supports. So it can kind of create a domino effect across the board for our small district. So that's one of the things I think moving forward for us, as we're doing schedules for students, I think we're really going to have to kind of look at those trends. Okay, who are the students that are missing the most days? Who are the teachers that are missing the most days? And I think in most cases, it's legit, it's due to illness. Like Stephanie said, I think, I'm sure it does have something to do with our immune system, and hopefully things are going to get better. But try to look at those trends too. And the students that are missing the most days, let's try to pair them with the teacher that is here the most, that maybe is more of your engaging type teacher, because all teachers have different personalities.
Sure.
So let's not only think about the actual course that the student needs to take, but whenever possible, let's try to pair those students up with the correct personalities to try to get them motivated and get them here. I guess we're just going to have to keep thinking outside the box when it comes to that.
Yeah. I like that level of thinking, like not just looking at the number on the screen and then saying, okay, we're going to pair them, but also the personality match. And Lakeitha, something you were talking about happened to me as a fifth grade teacher too, where we had one of the three of our little rotation was out for 3 weeks, unfortunately due to breast cancer. And so we split the class up, and I had 45 kids. I was a second year teacher out of college teaching 45 kids. You're right. No real learning takes place. It was basically, I was just trying to keep them alive. I think that was my goal every day. Like, just stay alive. Don't kill each other. It'll be fine. We're going to make it through this. And we did some little fun activities, but there's not much rigor. To go back what Chris was saying, one of those things, we didn't have much rigor or relevance. It was basically just me and relationships, and that was all I was trying to survive. Michael, what do you see in terms of that adults, teacher absences, a problem? Same?
Yeah, same problem. We do a staff climate survey a couple times a year, and starting around the COVID years, we started to see the things like, hey, I'm getting burnt out, I'm tired, I need this, I need that, more student discipline support, things like that. And we just, obviously there's a correlation there. But we reinstitute something that we call wellness buddies, where every staff member had another person in the faculty to kind of connect with them and check in. And we actually make that a routine in different ways in our community. And we have a bowling tournament, we just things that all schools probably have, but we institute some other traditions beyond just the typical staff party throughout. And we have something like that every month, where we're trying to re-engage teachers to be a part of the community and part of our faculty community, because kids see that it actually has lowered staff absenteeism. But I think our greatest idea ever, and it was actually district wide, is that we have dedicated subs. We actually have two teachers, 2 substitutes. They're dedicated to our building. They get to know the kids and the staff, the faculty, and the curriculum really well, and help in advisory. And those 2 dedicated subs have really made a big impact for teachers who are tired, burnt out, or whatever. And they even feel more comfortable that, hey, since Mary or Fatima is taking my class today, I am going to take a mental health day. We all call it that, at least in our building. I'm sure we call it that everywhere. But it actually has worked really well. And we're hoping to preserve that. Yes, that was COVID money, but we've even talked about at the school board level, we need to keep this. This needs to happen throughout the district. But it's also about making sure that those wellness buddies, that there's a process for connecting and reconnecting, maybe even changing them so that staff feel welcome and that so they're more engaged. They have a sense of place, just like we're talking about the students.
Yeah.
We need to have the same thing for our faculty because we tend to we're in our own bubbles, our own teams. So we realize that, wow, we should be doing this for us all the time. And so our culture and traditions really, we feel have really helped minimize that staff absenteeism. It's not perfect, but those are some things that we've tried and we're finding that they're working well. And yes, I did win the first bowling tournament.
Well, I'm glad you won that first tournament, but I also was thinking, I used to always have this comment that the buildings, our school buildings exist for the kids, not the adults. But what you're saying is actually making me reframe my thinking to say, like, if you don't have a welcoming atmosphere where the adults feel like a part of it, the kids are going to feel the effects of that and they're not going to want to be there either. So
Right.
wise to invest in staff, even if it's a bowling tournament.
Yeah. It was Maya Angelou, right? It's how they're going to remember how you made them feel. And if you're always tired and feeling like this and grumpy and all that, it's a no-brainer. We know that, but practicing that and building traditions and a structure for staff, not just talking about it or hoping we have a staff party, we feel like it's really made a big difference.
I love it. Okay, two quick questions here to wrap up because we're getting close to the end here, and I want to make sure I touch on both these, and the last one will be a success story, so I want to hear that too. We talked a lot of kind of the bads, the things that we have to deal with, and how we're kind of overcoming those, and then at the end I want to have a success story. But before we get to that, we've touched a little bit about this. We've talked about how families and community play a bit of a role. What's happening. Well, and I just realized I spelled it. How do you engage them? Yeah, that's right. So spell check, not always my friend. So what do we do about that? How do we engage those the family members? Because we see that can actually have a really positive impact on the lack of absenteeism, getting kids encouraged to go to school because we're actually working with them. Michael, where do you guys work on there in Portland in terms of that community building outreach piece?
Yeah, it's a no-brainer, but it really works, and that is just letting parents know regularly what's going on. A lot of parents don't really know what the actual number of absences the kids had, or they're just always excusing it. They don't really even know why sometimes, but just informing parents on a regular basis. Text messaging, all of our SISs probably have that function, but that's actually really helped. It's annoying to them, some of them, but letting them know that they even missed their academic support block, not just math, actually is really helpful. And then they can begin to track that, like, why are you always missing math? So we're not just having that conversation, but it's real time as well. And then those agreements that I talked about have been just huge success for us, that the parent, student, the advisor, the principal, and a school counselor, social worker all have to be a part of. That is created, then we talk about it, then it's mentioned in conference, and then the student is also collecting data on themselves. It's just made a huge impact in terms of them taking some responsibility, accountability, right? So those agreements, sometimes they're called contracts, whatever, but we changed the name of agreement because we're agreeing on this to help you. And then the old-fashioned home visits have really helped us. I think they should be, a lot of people are kind of afraid of it now. There's so much worry about whatever, but home visits have also made an impact for us, and I highly recommend it. And I've done many, and it's really even just changed my perspective of what's going on at home, what the kids talking about, and given me a new sense of, how kind of not like allyship, like I can even be a stronger ally and advocate for these families.
Because you were able to go and visit with them and connect with them. Remind us what triggers the agreement, Michael, in your district. You said, because you mentioned this earlier too about getting that agreement started. What would be the thing that would be the triggering event to get that started, that process started for a student?
Right. So if a student has 5 or more unexcused absences in a quarter, so just in 1 quarter, that agreement is kicked in and it starts in the crew advisory program.
Okay, good to know. Let's go to Chris on this. What role are you seeing with the families there in your community?
Well, I agree with Michael. I think it's so important that you have to keep families informed of what's going on. We have established parent universities with our elementary campus to try to get parents in as much as possible. Hey, you want to come in? We're going to feed you. We're going to keep you informed of new legislation, go over some literacy strategies that can help your child. We've reached out to our retired teachers, and there's still pivotal points in the community, and had them kind of go out to their religious organizations or whoever to relay message and try to encourage as many people as possible to contribute to the school system and to get involved. And listen, we use sports as an avenue of getting people here. People are going to show up to the ball games, so we try to maybe tie something in maybe prior to a ball game to where we can hand out some flyers or something. So we're continuing to search for ways to get parents involved because it starts there. And one of the things that we do have to realize is that not all parents had a positive experience when they went to school themselves.
Great
So
point.
we have to kind of change that perception.
Right. That negative experience or that feeling could definitely seeps into the kids when it's like, well, now it's happening to you. The same thing happening to me. Right. That's interesting. Thinking about that perspective, how do we uncoach them or teach them, I guess, to really think about school in a different light? I think that's important. Lakithia, what about you, those family strategies? Because you work kind of with a campus, you work with kids online. So there's kind of a lot of different angles in your situation.
So I employ several strategies. One of them is, and this is for my middle school and high school students, I'll just ask a question that they may not know the answer to. So something that we would know for our age group that their parents would know. So, oh man, I listened to this song. Go home and ask your mom and come back and tell me what she says. And you would be surprised how many of them go home and ask their mom. Well, then you come back and they're like, well, my mom wanted to know. So now, even though I'm even though I'm virtual, I have that dialogue with the parent because we're passing messages back and forth through the student, which surprisingly enough, the students are excited about. Like they log in and say, Ms. Walker, my mom told me to tell you. Okay. Because I'm just asking random questions that people that were born before 1980 may know. So
That's my age bracket.
Yeah. And there are always questions that the students don't know. Okay. I said, kick it into gear. And they were like, what does that mean? And I said, go home and ask your mom. And I had like 11 students come back. Oh, this is what my mom said. So that is one of the tactics I use to kind of engage the parents, even though I'm virtual. Because even with my littles, I'll come home, I'll have them go home and ask a question. One of the other things that I do that has proven very, very effective, students nowadays are used to that instant gratification. They get a click on their phone, they're playing a game, there's instant gratification. So I have so many incentives set up in my classroom. So just like their phones, they get that instant gratification. So whenever I have several that are class based and then individual based. So my class based ones include marbles. They have a marble jar. And when the class gets quiet or when everybody gets the right answer into chat, the classroom teacher goes to put a handful of marbles in there, and that's a constant visual because they're constantly looking. They always want to show me, Ms. Walker, let me show you what our jar looks like now. So that really gets them going with it. The other thing is I have tallies, and so tally marks, and that's a class thing. Every time someone is able to, the whole class gets quiet. By the time I count to 5, the whole class gets logged in and gets their do now in. You get a tally mark, and I put it on the board, and every tally mark is 1 minute of free time at the end of class. You ought to see these students work 5 minutes of free time at the end of class. I mean, you would think I was giving them 30 minutes, they work hard, and then they hold one another accountable. Hey, be quiet. Hey, don't forget to get your answer in, so that they're able to hold one another. So then that builds on that social, that builds on that class climate, that builds on that camaraderie. So there's so many layers that constantly compound to continue to focus on the social as well as academic. And then I have a sticker chart, and that's usually for my littles. They give me a great answer. We're doing 5 W sentences. You give me a sentence with all 5 W's in it. Sticker. And they're like excited about that. And my final one is every campus I work with, I send a little treat box. It's like a treasure chest treat box. And so that instant gratification of seeing that treasure chest sitting on the teacher's desk, the classroom coach's desk, and I can say, Sarah, thank you for that wonderful answer, or thank you for getting your answer in first or getting logged in first. Can you go get something out of the treat box? you would hear, I mean, even in middle school and with my biggins, they're like, "Oh, I want a treat. Miss Walker, can I answer next? Miss Walker, can I read next?" And so building that engagement that builds that classroom and climate of being welcome, and it's a safe space to learn and make mistakes, really keeps them coming back. And even if they're not coming back for their instructional delivery and they're just coming back for their treat box, they're in the seat and they're engaged. And so that's the biggest win there.
Definitely, let's build on that, because I know we're almost out of time. So I mean, again, thinking of the community engagement piece, but also a success strategy that we could share here for our kind of final minute, something you're doing there that really helps kind of bridge this gap of absenteeism.
I think one of the things I can't say it's working yet, but I believe it will. So I'll just say that is we've started really using our platform to put all of the details of a student absence plan. So if they have a chronic absenteeism, we have to put them on a plan, of how we're going to improve that. That plan is in our LMS. And so everything's visual. So the charts and graphs are there, how they're doing is there. And so really making, LMSs when they came online, I don't even know when that was, in the 90s, it made things forward facing to parents that never has been forward facing.
Right.
And it's only gotten better. And our current platform has features on it that I think will help parents now understand what they're looking at. Because a lot of times, one, they don't have the time to sit there and figure it out. They don't know necessarily all the things and the acronyms and stuff that we use. So how can you make that visible? And I think that will help us have better conversations and then support families to help problems, whatever that might be. So I think that's one of the things, getting a platform that really helps us articulate what we're doing and show all the levels of what we're doing for their kid very specifically, I think is going to be very helpful.
Yes, forward-facing, visual, similar to what Lakeitha was saying with the students too, having those charts, having some way of seeing it. Chris, what about you? Success story, strategy you're using that you think is going to help with this?
Yeah, I was thinking of a couple of grade levels this past year that had a competition with one another. And so the class that had the highest attendance percentage had a pizza party at the end of the semester. And that seemed to work. So maybe we just need to throw pizza parties for everybody and we'll have a solution. One of the things that we've done for our teachers is those teachers with perfect attendance for the semester, we have a cash bonus for them. So again,
Ooh, nice.
Now, not a whole lot of people have received that cash bonus, but I think it is helping. So we just have to continue to search for those strategies, and I really like what I've heard. So I'm definitely going to be using, Stephanie, those things that you just mentioned. I like to take ideas, borrow them. I don't believe in reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, and I think one I'll share before I get to Michael for our last point is that my daughter's high school does this now, where if the student is present so much percent, I think it's 95% for the semester, they get to choose one of their finals that they can opt out of. So they still have to take it, but they can opt to not count it as a grade if it affects their grade in a negative way. It's like, ooh, I really bombed that test, but because I was present for all these days, now I can drop. So some incentive to stay, to make sure you're just physically there and physically present. Michael, last one, success story, strategy, idea, besides bowling tournaments, which we all love.
That's afterwards. That's the after party.
Yeah.
A quick one, a really quick one. It's something we have in place that I think is really important, that especially when seniors are struggling the most, the fact that they have some kind of meaningful capstone or something that they really are engaged in, it can make all the difference for kids. I had one kid who his capstone, his final project was giving away a guitar and recruiting, getting everybody to come to see his band called Waste. And I have great photos, but he had perfect attendance for like 4, almost 5 weeks, because he had to put this all together. He had to do some research. I could go on. But the bottom line is I've got great photos of him jumping off the bass drum and playing behind his head. And it was a magical moment, right? He was engaged, right? He had something worth coming to school for.
And maybe that's what it comes down to, right? And I think we've hit that on a lot of these points. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists today for joining us, and those of you that joined us in the chat too. Again, this is a big topic that takes a lot of time and emotional energy to kind of think about how do we overcome all of these challenges that were laid in front of us. And I want to thank our friends at Otus and EdSurge, of course, for putting this together. I don't think we have, there's still a lot of questions. I think we can all kind of agree to that, and we don't have all the answers, but I think we're getting closer and closer to what maybe gets to a point where we have those students more involved. And thank you guys so much again. This has been Addressing Chronic Absenteeism and Engagement, a conversation with K-12 leaders. Thank you. And Otus, check out Otus at otus.com, of course, for some of those resources you heard. Stephanie and Chris mentioned a couple of things they're using there as well. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.